Okay, so we're in Parshas Bo, and something interesting about Parshas Bo. It's like the climax has been building, right? The entire Parshas Ve'eras. We learned about the 7 makos, the 7 plagues that the Egyptians had to endure before letting the Jewish people go, and of course, we know there's supposed to be 10. And Parshas Bo goes into the last 3 makos, and the intensity is building up. The climax of this tremendous story is building up. Interestingly, for the first 9 makos, there seems to be a certain amount of civility between Paro and Moshe. For some reason, I don't know why, up until this point, Paro really relates to Moshe in a very respectful kind of way. He could have been like, get out of here. He could have ordered his guards to kill him. Like, here's this guy causing trouble. And it's really not until the end of right before he's about to announce the 9th Makkah, the 9th plague, he's finally intense. So Paro finally says, so he talks about the 9th Makkah of Choshech, as after the 9th Makkah. He talks about the Makkah of Choshech, of darkness, and then Moshe comes in, and he's about to warn Paro about the 10th Makkah, and Paro says, I want you to get out of my face. Literally, those are his words. I don't want to see you anymore, and if I see you again, you're dead. Okay, so finally, all the civil, respectful behavior that existed till now between Paro and Moshe all of a sudden ceases, and Moshe says, okay, I'm going to leave you, no problem. You don't want to see me anymore, that's fine. I'm going to say one more thing. I'm going to warn you about one more Makkah, and then I'm out of here. Okay, so he warns him about the 10th plague that's going to come, and of course going to kill the firstborns, and that's what we're holding right now. So we're in the highest climax right now of the story. We know what's about to happen. The 10th plague is about to come. The Jewish people are about to go. However, there is a pause in the story. There's a pause in the story, okay? If you follow along in the Chumash, we're in the 4th Aliyah. Moshe just warned Paro about the 10th plague. And then he says, and then the Torah pauses and says, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chadashim, rishanu l'chatshei hashana. You should know that this is going to be the Rosh Chodesh. Okay, by the way, this is the first mitzvah of the Torah. In case you were wondering, where are all the mitzvahs and how's the setup of the Torah? We know the Torah has stories and it has commandments, it has mitzvahs. So where does it kind of break down? Well, basically, here's how it goes. From the beginning of the Torah, it talks about creation, it talks about stories, till this point, in the 4th Aliyah, in Parshas Bo. And fourthly, here's the first mitzvah, number 1 of 613. And this is the first one. And then as we go on, of course, we know there's many, many more to follow. The first mitzvah, the Torah notoriously falls in the most odd place possible. What is it doing here in the climax of this story? Okay, this is the first mitzvah is that we're supposed to sanctify the new moon when it's time to sanctify, when the moon looks full, right? The moon, on contrary, after the moon disappears and the new cycle begins, we're supposed to sanctify the new moon, and then this is supposed to be the first month of the year, Nisan, and then from there we count the rest of the months. What's it doing here? It's an interesting topic. It's a very important topic. You can call it a very fundamental topic. This is where all the holidays come from. They're all based on the calendar. Here's the establishment of the calendar. It's a very important fundamental mitzvah. What's it doing here? This is the last place I would think the first mitzvah should fall. I would say either do it before the whole story started, or wait till after. What's it doing right here? Okay, so that's really a very important question. It really strikes me every year as we read through the story and as the climax builds up. What's it doing here? So the Sfas Emes has a famous answer. This is one of the famous Sfas Emes's. By the way, the Sfas Emes's yard site was actually very recent. It was past week. I believe it was Hey Shvat. So it was actually a couple of days ago. Sfas Emes, what's notorious about him is that he is a Rebbe, a Hasidic Rebbe. He was a Ger Rebbe, one of them. And he's also respected and admired by all the different groups. Even though he's a Hasidic Rebbe, he's one of the few that really earned the admiration of all the different groups of Jews. And one of the reasons is because his novel thoughts were not only on Chumash, but they're also on Talmud. He's well known as his novel thoughts on Talmud, and everybody studies it in all the yeshivas, etc. So he had that kind of unique thing. Not too many people have that. Anyways, what does he say about this to answer this question? Because we're really in a quandary over here. What's this verse doing here? And basically, to sum it up, what he goes to say is that this verse is an important lesson to the Jewish people, not only is it a mitzvah, of course it's a mitzvah, but there's something much deeper beneath the surface. And the Jewish people needed it at this point to go free. And the premise here is that when we know that the Jewish people went free, we went free, right? What did we go free from? It wasn't just a physical freedom. Of course, we were slaves and we were freed from being slaves. Of course, it was a freedom from physically being a slave, and that's obvious. That's correct. But there's so much more to it. There's also a spiritual freedom, because on a spiritual level, at this point in the story, we were on the bottom. Okay, we were slaves. We had a slave mentality. We had been idol worshipers. We had fallen into the lowest depths of impurity. And really, we were almost unrecognizable from our Egyptian neighbors. There was very little difference. In fact, famously, when the Jews were standing at the Red Sea and God was about to perform the amazing miracle of splitting the sea, the angel said, "Why are you saving these people? These people do idol worship. These people idol worship. Why are you saving this group of people and killing that group? What's the difference?" There was almost no recognizable difference between us and them at that point. So we were on our lowest point we ever were at that point. Okay. And we needed to be freed not only from our physical bondage, but also from our spiritual state. And really, if you want to know, this is really in a nutshell, why we make such a big deal about Yetzias Mitzrayim, about remembering the going out of Egypt. And we remember it all the time. Every time we make Kiddush, we remember it twice a day in Shema. We remember it constantly. Why is it such an important theme in Judaism that we remember the going out of Egypt? It's because there are lessons that are relevant to us to this very day. And maybe we're not going out of Egypt today, right? We're not slaves, so that part maybe doesn't relate to us as much. But the part of going out of spiritual slavery, that's very much relevant to us. Okay, so they needed this lesson of Achodesh Hazeh Lachem for their spiritual salvation. Now, what is the lesson of Achodesh Hazeh Lachem? As a Hasidic master, what they were known for is not only they read it in its simple meaning, they would also sometimes take the words and take a completely, perhaps homiletic explanation. So Chodesh, the word for month, right? This month is Rosh Chodesh. Chodesh, the word for month, also comes from the word Chadash, which means new. And what the lesson of Rosh Chodesh is what he calls the power of Hischadshus, the power to renew oneself. Okay, this is the message of Rosh Chodesh. The message of Rosh Chodesh is that there's a certain power to renew, and this is the lesson he wanted to tell the Jewish people. Let's just analyze this on a deeper level, because this is a very fundamental lesson, and it very much applies to us as well. Spiritual energy is constantly renewing. Okay, spiritual energy. This is a very important theme, and it's a philosophical theme, and it's a theme we have to understand. That science tells us. Here's one of the theses of science: is that an item that exists will continue to exist forever unless it is acted upon by some other force. That's one of the basic themes of science. Is that's what we see. If something exists, it's going to exist forever. You have a table. I have a table in front of me. It's going to exist forever unless some other force acts upon it. And that's the world we see in front of us. Things exist. They just stay there. But in reality, it's not true. And we say it in our davening. We say this in the blessings of Shema, right? When the morning blessings of Shema, there's two blessings in the morning prayers. The first blessing, right before we say Baruch Atah Hashem Yotzar Ha'maros, we say this cryptic line, HaMechadesh, we talk about God, how he renews, HaMechadesh B'chol Yom Tamid, every day, constantly, Ma'aseh Bereishis, the creation of the world. The Ma'aseh Bereishis, the creation from the first 6 days, continue to happen every single moment of existence. In other words, the fact that I am standing here before you is because God is creating the world from the beginning, from scratch, at this very moment. That's why I'm here. And if not for that creation from scratch, I could not be here. It's impossible. It's impossible for anything to exist without constant creation, a constant creative force. That's spiritual energy. It's a constant creative force, and it's happening every moment. And although it looks to us and it looks to science like, well, it's just here and it's not going anywhere, it's actually not true. The reason why everything exists is because it's being created from the beginning every single moment. That's how the world exists. And, this lesson is extremely important in understanding how things work. By the way, if you look at our physiology, There's a few things in our physiology that actually point to this as well. It's actually a metaphor. Our body is a metaphor for creation, by the way. In all Kabbalistic teachings, the human body is a metaphor for the greater creation. So if you look at the human body, for example, right? So here I am, I exist, right? And I exist because I exist. I was created a while ago and I continue to exist. But in reality, it's not true. If a person ever studied the idea of a tourniquet, if someone's familiar with this, if a person's bleeding profusely and you can't stop the bleeding, you're nervous this person's going to die from losing too much blood. So you tie up the limb, right? You're familiar with this concept? You tie up the limb with a tourniquet. It closes off the blood from flowing to that limb, and it'll hopefully stop the bleeding, keep the person alive. But science tells us, and the medical world tells us, that there's a very high percentage that this person will lose that limb forever, right? Why should they lose that limb? That limb is still there. They'll lose that limb because blood stopped flowing to that limb, and blood is life. So if blood stops flowing, it doesn't get life. If it doesn't get life, it ceases to exist. In other words, all of our limbs cannot continue to function unless blood is flowing to it constantly. New blood is pumping constantly. So if you want to get this concept of chidush, how the spiritual dimension is constantly flowing and sending life to our world, think of the way the heart is constantly sending blood to every part of the body, and that's the only way it can exist. And without that blood constantly flowing, constantly pumping every second, if it didn't pump, if it stopped for a second, it could not exist. It cannot live. Okay, so that's a metaphor for this concept, how spiritual energy is constantly flowing. Another metaphor in the physical body, just if we want to take it a step further, if you look at cells cannot live. They don't live, actually, a very short lifespan. Cells are constantly dying and reproducing, creating new cells. Okay, before you, I'm not the same person I was, whatever it was, 5 minutes ago, or whatever it was, 2 hours ago. I don't know how long it takes. But for all the cells to reproduce and the old cells to die, we're constantly being recreated before our very eyes. We don't even realize that we are constantly being recreated. And that, once again, is a metaphor for this concept that spiritual energy is constantly recreating our world. And we think it's a constant. There is no constant. HaChodesh Hazalachem tells us this idea that the world is constantly recreated every single moment. And what this does to us when we internalize this message, it means a few things. It means that just because something was is no indication that that's how it needs to be from that point forward. It can be in a very physical way, like it's telling you, yeah, you were a slave till now, and you had no chance of being free. And for 210 years, you were a slave, and your father was a slave, and you only knew slavery, you knew nothing different, has no telling on what's going to be a moment later. Because when the clock strikes 12, right, when Chatzos comes, that famous Chatzos, you are going to be a free person. So just because you're in a certain circumstance, one moment has no indication of what's going to happen the next moment, because the next moment is a brand new creation. That creation that is, what's going to be, never was ever in the history. So this moment never existed before. So there's no reason why it has to be just like it was before. It happens to be. In general, God creates it the same way. It changes it very subtly, so we don't notice. But in reality, the new creation has nothing to do with the previous creation, so it can be completely different. By the way, the Kabbalists tell us that there's no two prayers that are the same. I don't know if you ever heard this before. This is an amazing concept. Here we are, we're praying the same Shemona Esrei, right? The same prayer 3 times a day, day after day, day after day. It starts to get boring. You start to wonder, why am I doing the same thing over and over again? So the Kabbalists tell us that, no, that's not true. Because every moment in history, you look at the 6,000 years of creation, it was created from the beginning. It was created for 6,000 years. Every moment is a very unique moment. It'll never come back. Every prayer that was intended to be at that time, you'll never get that prayer back. So if you pray tonight Mariv, you'll have that Mariv. If you miss this Mariv, you'll never get this Mariv again. You may daven Mariv tomorrow. You may daven Mariv the next night. You may have daven, but this Mariv you can never get back again. There's something called Tashlum, and you can daven Shachris twice. Okay, but other than that, if you miss it, it's called in the Shulchan Aruch Muvas Lo Yichal Liskon. It is a something that is gone forever. You can't fix it. You can never get it back. Every prayer is so uniquely different because of the time, because each time is so uniquely different. Each moment is so uniquely new. And again, it teaches us this idea of this chadshut, how every moment is so new and so different. So physically, the world can be completely different. So if you're stuck in a certain circumstance, that's this moment. Next moment is brand new. So that's one concept it tells us. Emotionally, this frees us. Okay, this frees us emotionally as well, because emotional challenges. A person, what are the emotions? People have anxiety. People have depression. People have stress. Why do they have these things? Because they're living either in the past or in the future. Right? People are depressed because of their past. They have certain things that happened in their past, and they're stuck in that past, so they're depressed about whatever it was that happened, or they have anxiety about what's going to be. Right? So they're struggling with anxiety. They're confined in this anxiety. They can't free themselves because they're constantly worried about what's going to be. So instead of living in the now, because this moment is new and it's completely has nothing to do with what was or what will be, it's a now moment, we're focused on what was or what will be. So when a person can break free, he's confined to it. It's very difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but conceptually, there's no reason a person needs to be attached to what was or what will be. He can be in the now. By the way, the word confinement, right? We're confined, right? Confinement, well, the word in Hebrew for confinement is meitzar. If you look at the word Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim is confinement. That's what it means, that we were confined, either physically, emotionally, spiritually, we were confined to certain places. And freedom means going out from Mitzrayim, going out from our confinement and realizing that there's a now. And finally, so there's physical, there's emotional, there's also spiritual. Okay, and this spiritual is very, very important for a person's growth. Sometimes, and you can elaborate on this a lot, I'm going to be brief with this, but sometimes a person has a certain inspiration to do something good. And he thinks for a minute, he says, you know what? That's not who I am. That's not what I am. That's not who I was. That's not who I'm going to be. I'm not going to do it. I'll give you an example. Let's say it's we're starting to get finally longer Shabbos afternoons. Okay, so you get a good couple hours Shabbos afternoon, and maybe at some point you're sitting there, you did your nap already, you did your playing with the kids, you did your thing, and now you're sitting on the couch and you got a half hour till whatever it is, or till Shalosh, whatever it is. You have time. So you think, maybe I should open up a Chumash and start reading it. Maybe I should open up a Jewish Torah book and start learning. And then you say, no, that's not who I am. That's who I am. I study now in all my free time. I did in the past. I'm going to do it in the future. Why should I? That's not who I am. I'm not going to do that. And what basically is happening is the person's confining himself, saying, listen, this is what I was. I know what I'm going to do. This isn't appropriate for me, so I'm not going to do it. And I'll go on to do something else. Right? But realizing that I don't live based on the past and I don't live based on the future. I live on the here and now. And this moment is new, it's here, and it's never going to come back again. So to take advantage of it and live in the moment, that's the freedom. That means going out of the confinement of Mitzrayim. Hopefully these thoughts, very deep, but very, very important and very fundamental. I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos.
Shabbos, thank you.